be filmed and streamed live. The recording and transcript will be published afterwards on the States Assembly website. All electronic devices, including mobile phones, should be switched to silent. So for anyone who comes up to the table, who comes up to speak, if they could state your name and role if you come up to speak at the table. So if we begin with introductions, I'm Deputy Curtis, the chair of the panel.
Connetab Mark Labby from the Parish of Greville, Vice Chair.
Deputy Porray, panel member.
Deputy Helen Miles, panel member.
Constable Richard Vivett, Minister for Children and Families.
Deputy Malcolm Ferry, Assistant Minister for Children and Families.
Anne Homer, Head of Finance Business Partnering for SIPES, including Children and Families.
Ben Sanderman, Head of Health Policy, but also leading on the Children's Civil Status.
I'm Keith Posner, Interim Chief Officer for SIPES.
Okay, thanks everyone. We've got 1.5 hours for this hearing. So just to start with some questions on the play strategy. So Minister, could you provide an update on the current status of the play strategy, also regarding the provision of play spaces in St Helier under the Bridging Island Plan?
Yes, Malcolm. I mean, it's, as I say, it's only recently that we've, in effect, taken responsibility for this. So it was shared between three ministers, and it was apparent that somebody needed to actually take responsibility, and we've done so. And I will ask Malcolm. I'm going to actually delegate responsibility to the play strategy to Malcolm, so I'll ask Malcolm to speak.
Thank you. So yeah, this the Minister kindly took this piece of work on and then delegated it to me. So if you look at the budget, there was an amendment by Deputy Gardner and then a further amendment by Deputy Dublé. One was to find a sum of money to get the play strategy into place, and the second amendment to that amendment was to incorporate the work of the Jersey Youth Parliament into taking that play strategy forward. So we have produced our own amendment to include both of those provisions and to deliver a play strategy within existing budgets. So not having to find new money for a particular individual, but to work with officers across our estate to be able to start to look at what a play strategy might look like for Jersey. So yesterday was Children's Day. The Connetab was there. A fantastic day. We had some really good speakers. And what came across, of course, for us was, you know, the United Nations Conventions of Rights of the Child, Article 31, is fundamental to children having safe play spaces to be able to access. So a play strategy will look across the piece. What is the offer in Jersey? How can that offer be improved? What is the communication like for children and for parents to be able to have easy access to what is available? What can be improved, and what new play spaces may need to be incorporated so that every child across the island has simple access to play spaces. A big part of that work, of course, is going to be engaging with the Connetabs and all the parishes to see what that offer might look like. But the important thing to remember is there is lots of really good provision across the island. And a lot of it is about communicating what that good offer is and how people can access it on their doorstep. So, you know, regardless of the play strategy, it is embedded in our work to ensure that children have a safe place to work, to play.
That's good to hear. And I know you mentioned about finding the funds within the budget that you've got already. And my next question was going to be that on 22nd of October in the Assembly, delays were attributed to resourcing constraints within SIPES. So what's changed there then?
So what's changed, I think, you know, sometimes when the budget is produced, minds are focused by amendments, to be fair, and we've reconsidered it in light of that amendment. And because we have the play policy, which has already been almost produced. It got to it being finalised, but never quite signed off. That gives us a really good platform with which to start a play strategy. So, you know, a quarter of the work has been done.
Yeah.
So really, you know, it is a piece of work which is oven ready and ready to move forward with. So yeah, you know, hearts and minds are changed in light of new evidence that comes into play.
Okay, so
Excuse
that
the
is
pun.
definitely continuing now, that is
Yes.
definitely in place and
Yeah.
going
I
ahead.
think I would say that there was never any, that it never wasn't going to continue. And I was surprised that there seemed to be this view that it wasn't continuing.
I think it may be to do with the work that had been done before seemed to come to a stop. Is it?
Yes,
Yeah.
but there was never, certainly on our part, any decision that it wasn't going to continue. Clearly, splitting it in the island plan between 3 departments didn't help, because
Yeah.
nobody really felt that it was theirs. But we certainly hadn't ever decided that we weren't taking it forward. And I think the latest solution, and it's still going into the children and young people's plan, which is the sort of overarching scheme, is the right place for it. We can manage it from there, and then we've got the Children's Outcome Board, is it? Executive Committee, and we'll report into that as progress is made.
Okay, great.
So, you did ask questions about, sports facilities within St Helier. I mean, certainly one I'm already aware of, the Springfield Sports Centre playground, which was built in 2014. It's now 10 years old and needs refurbishment.
And would that be moved because it's right along the busy roadside?
I would need to, clearly isn't our play area, but what we have established is that there is funding for that to be refurbished.
Right.
Now, that's, I hadn't, I don't know, Malcolm, do you want to take a note of that and see,
Because there's an open space area where it could be moved over to, and
Fine.
at the moment it's right on the busy road where children breathe car
Yeah.
fumes in and so on.
Okay.
We can take that away
Yeah.
and explore that.
Yep, so I'm happy to do that.
Yeah.
And this came out, I must admit, this came out in World Children's Day yesterday.
It did.
Children were asking for more facilities in town because Millennium Park gets quite busy. And I think Mark will be aware of this. I mentioned the lack of facilities in the east of the island. We seem to have created a number in the west, in the centre, but there are a few play facilities out in the east of the island. And I'm not quite sure why there is that east-west divide.
So all that will be considered as
Yeah,
part of the
yeah. Well,
plan.
we've lost another one potentially, which you're aware of.
Potentially.
Yeah,
Well, but let's hope
Right.
that improves.
and then there is the Fort Regent Play Zone as well, and that's another area that will need to be looked at. I'm not quite sure what the sort of long-term plan is for that. It's certainly still used. So that's another area that needs looking at.
Okay, and Deputy Ferry already mentioned about the feedback from the Youth Parliament, so there's how will that be with meetings with them and?
Absolutely. So that formed part of their sort of end of term report, and there was recommendations in that. So again, the person or people who pick up the play strategy, they will make sure they incorporate those recommendations and consider each of them in the overall strategy.
Okay, and you mentioned the previous play policy where quite a bit of work had been done. And so can you confirm if this is going to be part of the plan and will it be published?
So, yeah, I think it never got quite to the point of being signed off. So that would be the first step, to finalise that play policy, to publish that, and then to use that as the springboard towards developing a strategy.
so all that work that's gone into it will be part of this year.
Exactly.
Yeah, we have actually, the amendment does actually say, as long as the amendment's passed, that we're incorporating
The work that's already
policy
been done.
and the recommendations from young people via the youth parliament. So we've got that in the amendment.
Great.
And of course, you know, the most important people in this ongoing discussion are young people themselves. So we'll continue to engage and involve them in the strategy as well.
Okay, and I think it's my last main question on this. Given that other departments such as infrastructure and environment have contributed to playground redevelopment efforts, how are these efforts being managed to ensure a collaborative approach to the play provision?
So their buy-in is essential because although it's come under the Minister for Children and Families, we need to keep both of those ministries involved as the strategy is developed. So they are very much at the forefront of our thinking because without those two ministers, you know, the strategy will never be grounded in reality. So it's important that we keep them both
So you
involved.
worked with them as well. And what is the timeline for publishing supplementary planning guidance for developers on play space provision? And how is compliance with this policy being monitored?
Okay, so if I take the strategy itself, the timeline is to produce within a year.
Right.
And, you know, if we can publish any of those things beforehand, then we will do it. But ultimately, we would look at completion within the year.
But there's a number of things that we can take forward before the policy is produced. You know, there are existing plans for some play areas. We need to look at them, but there are things that we will be moving with anyway, and also working with developers. Unfortunately, the first of the houses, or the first major development, again, is in the west of the island. So it's another play area in the west of the island. But, you know, we haven't forgotten the east.
And do you think that will be one of your first ones to be seen, you know, with development?
Well, I've already started the process. I've been with the developers and the builders and started a dialogue with the primary school. So the children will have input into that. We're then going to do something similar with the youth club with the older children. So yes, you know, it'll certainly be part of this strategy.
Which youth club is that?
It's St Peter's Youth and Community
right, yeah.
Centre, and there's the next one.
Okay.
Yep. So I think one of the next ones again is in the west, which is St Wands have got a development. So
May I
Yep.
just come in? And it's also just worth noting where you've asked previous questions about Liscay, and we've said that we would like to try and improve the outside play area for that, so we'll be allocating money for that next year. But in terms of then what we can do in the interim before the site is more fully developed, I think some of the learning and consultation work through the play strategy could feed into projects like that as well.
Yeah, okay. And I just wanted to ask as well, are there any proposed changes to planning permission rules that would allow certain play facilities to bypass procedures?
I think we do know that one of the play areas hit problems with one of the pieces of equipment they put in, which needed planning permission and which wouldn't have been required in the UK. And I think that's something that we will try to look at. The trouble is we can't, you know, where do we draw the line with the strategy, and whose responsibility is planning issues. So we are aware of that, or certainly I'm aware of that issue. And if we can, we will try to look at that.
Okay, thank you. I think that's...
Yes, thank you, Minister. Thank you, Chair. I'd like to move on to something that's quite close to my heart, which is the Move More toddler play sessions. Now, we as a panel understand that Jersey Sport takes this, it's potentially not in your remit. However, can you confirm what contact your department has had, if any, with Jersey Sport and Minister for Sustainable Economic Development regarding this decision.
Okay.
Are you going to, I mean, I know a little bit
Yeah,
about it.
if you start, I can.
I think there was some contact, but it was not from our area. We had contact about whether we had any funds available from the people previously running it on behalf of the government. Now, we have absolutely nothing left in our budget for 2025. I mean, there are even one of the larger charities that we support. We've had to find funding through the Chief Minister for that. So we did not have the funding to continue or to allow them to continue. The decision to stop the funding, of course, wasn't ours, and it wasn't within our area. So yes, there was contact, but it was very much on the sort of periphery, if you understand what I mean. There was no discussions on the initial when sport actually advised them that they would no longer be funding that facility.
It's quite prevalent at the moment, obviously, with the closure of the Amazing Maze and other facilities. So it is quite, in the form. Can you advise the panel if there are any organisations receiving grant funding from the Government of Jersey that are required to provide similar services for toddlers or early years children?
I can't think of any off the top of my head. The good news, I'm sure the panel is aware that funding for that facility has been found for 2025.
Yes,
So
we
the
are
Chief
aware of
Minister has, but we do need to find a longer term solution because we don't want it to exist from year to year. We want to find a permanent solution. So many people highlighted the negative impact it would have on their lives if that facility was to fold. So we are committed to making sure that it continues.
It's particularly prevalent in my parish because, as you've already mentioned, the east of the island has deficiencies in this, and Move More have been providing facilities at my parish hall and the Gorey Common throughout the summers prior. So it's a very valuable service. So we thank you for that.
Good.
I think you've already answered one of my questions, question 7, about the funding for next year. So thank you.
So that's...
I think it comes to me now. We've got some questions around corporate parenting board that I think we touched on at the last meeting. We've had minutes for the 27th of March and the 1st of August, but we haven't had them for the 25th of September. It doesn't appear that they've been published. So we would just, hoping that you could advise the panel what was discussed at that corporate parenting board and outline the current work plan.
Donna can speak
Yes,
to that.
Donna might go, yes.
The last board meeting focused on, we had a report from Jersey Cares on Loving Homes, their piece of work that they'd done around that. We had a discussion about the data set and the plan around the dashboard. We had an update to the board around the work that we've been doing through the thematic work around the new board structure and the new subgroups. Trying to think what else was there off the top of my head.
Don't really put you on the spot.
I can't think what else there was. I think I provided a bit of an overview on some of the work we've been doing about missing and exploitation as well. Off the top of my head, it's probably something else.
Okay, thank you. We picked up from the 1st of August minutes that the Children in Care Council hadn't been established.
Yes.
So can you
correct.
tell us whether that's been established now, please?
So I think we had a plan last year that the Jersey Cares were going to provide the Children in Care Council, but that was supposed to have been in place by June. Hadn't been established really and wasn't really making any progress. There was a decision that we should move that into SIPES and under the Associate Director for Participation and try to re-establish it in a different way. So since we made that decision, which was late summer, just before that board meeting, we've set in place a programme, a plan for what we needed to do. We had 3 participation events last month for young people and children, where they came along. We've done work underneath that programme on the development of how to share the Bright Spot survey. We've done a Bright Spot survey that was done independently from the government on all the children in care and care leavers about their experiences of care. So we've been working on how we're going to roll that out. We started to roll that out with young people, the feedback, and started to work with them. There was some work with them about how to creating something around some of our care leaver offer and the development of our care leaver offer, which that group has been working on as well. And that will be ready for draft consultation with the Corporate Parenting Board on the 4th of December, the next meeting. So we've made good progress.
Can I just ask you about the situation with Jersey Cares? Because Jersey Cares have been kind of commissioned to do this Children in Care Council.
Yeah.
How was the decision communicated to them that they would no longer be taking that forward?
There was a email and conversation following that from the chief officer.
Okay. And has their grant been reduced at all?
Absolutely not. Haven't affected any of their contracting, apart from saying, given the difficulties we're having establishing the council and the lack of progress, the request was to ask them the decision was to move the council into another space and to ask them to focus more on advocacy, which we weren't really delivering advocacy to a lot of children, and we want to access more children and make sure they're getting a better offer and a deeper offer. Their grant hasn't been affected in any way.
Thank you.
No reduction in anything for them, but a request for them to drive their advocacy work harder.
When it comes to the Children in Care Council, at least Jersey Cares were kind of independent of government. So is there potentially a conflict then about bringing that Children in Care Council actually within the aegis of government?
I don't think so, no. I think the decision to move that across was done, it's been put under the Participation Associate Director. That director manages participation across loads of different areas of the government, and it's not made up that we've created a subgroup, a included and respected subgroup, which sits under the board. And that board's made up of partners across all different things. Jersey Cares is one of them, has been asked to be part of that, though they've declined. But they have been asked to be part of that. But that group includes some of our corporate parenting people that are arm's length bodies in the government in the law. It includes some government officers. It includes people that aren't in the government. It's a multidisciplinary group that will drive the plan, really, about making that council come alive and engaging how we engage children and young people. So it's very multidisciplinary. It's not one person.
So I think what we're saying is, are you satisfied that the government can be held to account for the services that they're providing to the children who are in the care of the minister?
I am, because we've got a range of things that look at that. It's not only having an advocacy the council, the care council, is about trying to, how do we engage children and young people who are in our care to be part of developing services and moving them forward, and how do we help those children and young people really shape what it needs to look like and tell us what's not working right. So advocacy, those young people will be with the things that aren't working for them through Jersey Cares, they'll have that advocate to advocate for them, to argue about what's not right, and individually look at their needs. So that will continue.
So Jersey Cares have accepted the advocacy part of the role?
They are, so the advocacy is their contract, really. The Children in Care Council was added on top.
Separate. So
the advocacy contract was always there. Adding the Care Council was an additional thing that was thought might help. But what's happened is, for a variety of reasons, I think it's been difficult to deliver that. We haven't seen any progress for children. And so it's not really about advocacy, that council. It's about how do those young people shape service development.
okay, I understand.
So those two things we need to see really differently. And I don't think that having a council that's run wherever will impact on advocacy.
I've got to say, I was shocked actually. I think it was in the June meeting when Jersey Cares told us it would be another year before they could bring the Children in Care Council into being, and that was not acceptable.
Can I just get briefly clarification on that? So advocacy services for care leavers are not being brought in-house, that's,
So
No, they're not.
Jersey Cares provides advocacy for children in care and care leavers. That continues.
right, okay,
That's their
just wanted
contract.
to
Totally
make sure,
separate.
yeah.
What we're
Okay,
talking about is just the Children in Care Council, which is the development.
Yeah, but Bernardo's also provide advocacy to
Yeah.
another set of
Other children.
young people.
It's worth saying the advocacy part is the major part of the fund.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It always has been from the start.
these different organisations have clarity on what their role is.
They've got a very significant
clear
contract,
that they're-
KPI.
yes.
Okay,
Yeah.
sorry, Helen.
No, not at all. You mentioned in the work you've been doing around corporate management board as well about the care leavers
Yeah.
offer, and again we talked about that last time. Is there any update that you want to give us on the
Yeah.
care leavers offer since we spoke to you last?
We've had quite an extensive piece of work going on that's been cross-agency. So we've had, like I say, Jersey Cares, the cluster, the children's cluster, CLS, lots of different parts of government working together, trying to make sense of the offer. And I think what we think is lots of people are trying to do lots in lots of different spaces. And for young people, that's probably a bit confusing. It's not that there's not a good offer, but probably everyone's doing a little bit different. So we've been trying to bring that into one offer. So that's nearly done. I think everyone agrees what it needs to look like. We're just about ready to bring a draft to the Corporate Parenting Board in December. And I think what we're trying to do is get all of the agencies to say, this is the care leavers offer, so that we can get built into a one-page summary that helps young people to see where you go for what. That work's quite well developed. And
So hopefully our next quarterly hearing then
Yeah.
we'll have some more on that. That's lovely.
yeah, it's
Thank
been a
you.
good piece of work actually. We've seen
Yeah,
good
thank
progress.
you.
I know it's into the future, but I did have because this actually spans my role as constable and children's and families minister, I did have a bit of an update on the unit that's going to be built for care leavers for accommodation out at St Peter's. So it was originally, and it still is, for sort of maisonettes in a block, but they've now put a unit over the top of that, so it's actually 5 units. I don't know who will get the penthouse unit at the top, but I was pleased to see that they'd, it's a case of putting another unit over the top of it is not as expensive as building another unit. So we'll have 5 young people.
Lovely. Well, we look forward to catching up on that, because I know it's an issue. Been an
I
issue
think the
of
care
concern.
leavers offer will be a good piece of work. I think the offer's quite a good one. I think perhaps it just needs a little bit more clarity.
Thank you. Again, looking at the minutes, 27th of March, it said that there's an overview of statistics highlighting that there are still some children in residential care that will be better placed into foster homes, and that the Jersey Foster Care Association questioned some of the long-term placement figures. Can you just clarify what those statistics and numbers are?
So were you in which report were you in?
March,
Sorry.
we were in the March 24 Corporate Parenting Board minutes.
Sorry, I'm hesitating because I wasn't here then, so I don't know those minutes.
Yeah.
So
I think what we're trying to get at was why there was some questions still about the long-term placement figures. I think there was some disagreement between the foster carers and...
So I think I can't answer that particular question, but if the minister's happy for me to, I can provide you a bit of an overview about.
I think that would be helpful.
Yes, yeah.
So we've done, since April, we've been working on quite an extensive piece of work about the whole of sufficiency. So to properly understand the children in our care, the care plans for them longer term, and where we think their pathway will go, and also trying to understand the children we haven't got in our care who we think might come in, and also to try and do some trend analysis. So that piece of work's been going over several months. It's called a sufficiency strategy. It will lead to us having a sort of strategy that enables us to say, well, this is what we think is going to happen over the next 5 years. This is where we think the trends will run. So I think we've done that piece of work now quite extensively, and that has now created the programme further improvements around the residential estate and foster care.
So
and what
some
we think.
clarity around that.
Yeah, we
Okay.
would
I mean, that was
absolutely be.
that
we'd
was
be
sort of
confident.
6 months ago. So
Yeah,
okay,
we'd be
thank you.
confident now. We've had a lot of analytical work done, a lot of benchmarking as well.
That sort of segues nicely when you talk about analytical work, because it's the next question was really about the metrics, and what sort of the metrics are being created for Jersey to measure our effectiveness, to ensure that the long-term placement sort of is stable, and to kind of create our own definition of suitable accommodation, etc., given the unique nature of Jersey.
So that analytical work, we've used some UK benchmarking, some individual children's care plan. We've overlaid the children care population with what we know will become care leavers. So we've done a better projection and understanding. Young people are going to be coming through care and they're going to be there for a while. And that's helped us to develop the sufficiency plan and the Loving Homes programme that we've just built. That programme shows you the number of children and care leavers we'll have in care over the next sort of 5 years, and it shows you what housing need we'll have. So we've started work with providers and people like Andium Housing to start to, like the Minister's saying about the property in his jurisdiction, we're trying to look at that across the whole island in terms of need.
Have we got a definition of suitable accommodation for care leavers?
Suitable accommodation would be the same way you apply, I suppose, in housing in the regulation in Ofsted in the UK.
So what would that be for Jersey?
We would class, if I talk in unsuitable, if young people are in prison, homeless, things like that would be unsuitable. Suitable accommodation would be if you're a child under 18, so not leaving care. Those would be expected to be in registered provisions. You didn't expect them to be in a registered home or registered provider or registered carer. Over 18, it would be normal housing law. But we would obviously, with all care leavers, I think that's the work we've been trying to do, is to look properly about what we think need will be, and trying to look at, we need to develop a more comprehensive offer in the future that will help young people move through care into semi-independence, still having a proper level of support, so they're in suitable accommodation. And then when they move through that into care leave in the other end, that's what we'd be trying to do.
Helen, I'd forgotten the name of the organisation where we had some concerns about young people, care leavers, being classed as suitably accommodated. Is Jersey...
Association of Youth and Friendship?
Yes, yeah.
Who?
Yeah, is that classed as suitable accommodation when someone is put up temporarily in Jersey Association
It might be
of
in
Youth
a
and Friendship?
It might be in a legal terminology, perhaps. I'd need to check that for you.
Are you aware of us having any young people in the...
You might have a young person that doesn't want to be living where they live.
Yes,
and moves
that
in
could
and
be
out
the only
different bits of
circumstances.
system.
I wasn't aware of any children that were housed by the Jersey Association of Youth and Friendship.
Will you be able to check that and perhaps come back to us?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, children, so young people, once they get beyond the age of us being able to assert where they live, they will make choices about how they move in and out of accommodation. It's more challenging to be able to determine everything. I think you would try to make them make the best suitable housing choices. And certainly we've had a lot of involvement in trying to support young people to have good accommodation. It would certainly be something we would drive quite hard at.
Okay, thank you. Would you over to Deputy Porray now?
Okay, thank you. I'm going to be asking some questions about the cost of living.
Right.
So, Minister, in our last public quarterly hearing with the panel, you stated that the new rented dwelling licensing scheme aims to improve housing conditions and that this will have a positive impact on children. Can you please provide us with more details about the scheme and how this will specifically benefit families with children, and how the scheme will also address housing quality issues?
Right, so the rented dwelling licensing scheme was opened in May, and that's part of the government's work to improve the standards of rental accommodation. But of course, that's a scheme that covers everyone, not just care leavers or, a code of practice has been published so that everyone can see the standards that are expected seen Jersey rental homes. Through that, there is, yes, there's a code of practice. Of course, we're not responsible for monitoring that code of practice. That's with the housing minister. I'm sure he can provide greater detail of the scheme.
Would you, as a minister, be able, are you in conversations at all with the housing minister and how this will affect the families with children?
Other than the fact that this is intended to improve standards for families and for those housing for children and young people. I believe we've got this as a topic for the Children's Outcome Executive Committee, at some stage. So that is the way by which we would get feedback.
Okay, so,
But I haven't been in any specific conversations with the housing minister.
okay. You may be able to provide us
Yes,
with
yeah.
feedback once you go through those
Yep.
meetings. Thank you. Okay, so Minister, in your view, how will the transition to the living wage impact families currently on minimum wage? And are there additional measures being considered to support families still facing financial hardship?
Well, I would hope that, a movement to the living wage would improve the standards for any family where, their income is currently on the minimum wage. Is it going to solve every problem? Well, no, it's not. The theme that came through again yesterday was about cheaper food and housing. I think some housing costs have reduced, but cheaper food is, virtually all our food is imported. It would be very difficult for the government to make food cheaper. There are other, we've introduced the school meals. And of course, for some families, those are free of charge. There is a support scheme for businesses linked to that move to the living wage. But we are in a cost of living crisis. I don't know what additional measures are available through CLS, but that would be the mechanism by which families would be supported.
Would you say that could possibly be reviewed in the future if you find there's a number of families that still won't benefit enough from the?
I think that's something that we could. We are we're very aware of this cost of living crisis. I think we've also had this. There's also been this. There's been a public health initiative. Malcolm, you might know more about it. With a voucher scheme.
Yeah, so the charitable sector still has a large part to play in supporting people who are on lower income. So every year there's the Joint Jersey Charities Christmas Appeal, where anyone who's feeling hardship can go and get, particularly if you've got children, toy vouchers, but electricity or heating vouchers and food vouchers. So, all of those things can be spent in local stores, and it covers everybody, but it's particularly aimed obviously at children at Christmas time. Happens every year. Every year the demand increases, but that scheme is open now, so people can go to Citizens Advice or parish halls and get access to that scheme.
Okay, just going slightly deeper into the living crisis, cost of living crisis, more specific about the food banks. Are there any specific measures that have been planned or put in place to support families who are currently relying on food banks?
Yeah, so Do you want me to answer that, Richard?
Yeah, I mean, I think we can do a joint, I can add to this. I mean, you know, I have two roles here, really. Yes, I've got one as the Children's Minister, but I spoke to the Evening Post the other day about the fact that, you know, parishes, some years ago, the welfare was moved to centrally into government, which was the right thing, but we are back there now supporting that gap. You know, in the last 2 years, I've paid out more in support through funds we've got in the parish than we had done in the previous 10 years. So I have no doubts about that crisis, and it's not just, you know, it's not just food. I mean, it's people who can't afford carpets, to get a second-hand bike for their child, clothes, shoes. Those are all things that are now coming back into a scheme that effectively was supposed to have disappeared over, you know, well over a decade ago. But now we're back into that role, and I don't think anybody's, you know, you won't hear any complaints. I think the paper was surprised that was the case, and the reason is that, you know, anything that's done is confidential, so of course nobody ever knows that it's happening. So it's not just the third sector, you know, the parishes are in there, and I can say that one initiative we've started is that we have started our own group. It involves myself, the rector of the parish, representatives from the third sector, so that in the parish we are trying to locate those people that need help, because we know about the ones that come to us. For every one that comes to us, there will be 9 others that haven't. And so we have just formed that group and had our first meeting about 10 days ago.
And if I may, Chair, I'd like to concur with what the Minister has said from a parochial point of view. That is happening and is going to be progressing in years to come, and I can concur with the Minister.
And specifically, you asked about food and the food bank provision. So a new initiative which has just been opened in Minden Place in the Salvation Army is the pantry store. And you know, it's different to ordinary food banks, if you like, because ordinary food banks are food for free, which is a limited supply and limited quality, to be fair to the food banks, because they're just trying to do the right thing by people. The difference with a pantry store is people pay for the food that they get at a vastly reduced sum. So £10 would buy you £50 worth of food, but the food is supermarket quality and supermarket range within the size of the shop that they've got. That's a really good initiative. Chief Minister, again, put some funds into that to make sure that it started on time. Coupled with that, front of house, there is some accommodation behind the Salvation Army, which is available for children, ideally with families. So there's 3 little cottages that have just been completely refurbished, and they are ready to accept people who need that emergency housing. So, you know, the Salvation Army offers a fantastic provision, but it's kind of accepting that. I think a lot of food banks originally were set up as a reactive sort of thing. What can we do to help people, which is great. That will continue. The pantry store is set up to think, how can we make the provision, you know, a better experience for people, because, you know, for a lot of people it must be really difficult to ask for that help the first time. With the pantry store, you're going into a shop, you're spending money, you're just getting vastly better value for money.
Thank you for sharing that with us. I mean, I was very privileged to come to the opening, and it's great. But and I appreciate you mentioned that the government did come with some sort of financial support to the organisation. Could you please be a bit more specific and tell us if there is any partnership between the government and this initiative or any other charity organisations?
So the Salvation Army is obviously a faith group that stands on its own financially. It's really wants to do that. Of course, it needs support. It needs support to get going, but it's a national network.
So you wouldn't be a direct partnership between the government and this particular organisation?
There certainly was sorry to interrupt. Yeah, there was a direct partnership to get it going, but like a lot of these initiatives, that they are designed to stand on their own 2 feet. Of course, if for whatever reason they needed extra funding, we would look at that as an additional one-off. But I think the whole idea, because there is money through the business, it's a more sustainable model, and it's a way that people can buy with dignity, and I think that's a nicer way to give a food bank provision. So we certainly want to ensure that it continues.
Okay, thank you for that. I do hope, they get the support from the government, because, as you said, they're doing an amazing job.
They are.
And especially with the accommodation at the back.
Yeah, it's brilliant,
I
isn't it?
think that is great. Thank you. So, Minister, what role do you envision for the youth service playing in supporting children impacted by poverty?
Yeah.
Especially to those who may not be able to access traditional office youth services?
Yeah. So I think it's important to remember, the youth service is a universal offer. It is across the island. It is an open and accessible to all young people, regardless of their physical or whatever disability they've got. It is an inexpensive way for children to get an enjoyable evening. There is a small charge of £1 to £1.50, and that just makes sure that, children have got some buy-in. But there is provision to review that if there are individual young people that would find that a struggle. But actually, as we're talking about the cost of living, one thing about the youth service is it's the early radar for people, young people, who are obviously in poverty. So what the youth service can do is kind of be the eyes and ears for those young people. And if somebody is identified as needing extra support, they can signpost them to additional services that might be able to help them, might be able to give them that bit of advice that they need, or may be able to engage further with them if needed. So yes, it's a great fun place to be. The Minister and I went the other week and looked at the inclusion project at St Peter and engaged with those young people, did some archery and some cooking hot chocolate outside, and it's a great fun evening. But behind all that, there are youth workers who are making sure, they're looking at what young people might need, and pointing them in the right direction if they need
And
to.
they would be
You've got the outreach workers
The
as well.
outreach
The outreach workers are looking after those children who don't wish to become part of the youth clubs and engage with the youth service, but in effect they are engaging with the youth service through those outreach workers, and they play a very important part.
How do they identify themselves, the outreach workers?
Well, they have cards, don't they, that show
Especially
their
to
part of the youth
those,
service.
to those
Show this.
youngsters who are more isolated.
They wear jerseys.
But we can't leave this piece without mentioning that the new youth centre in St Helier will be a great way to reach out to people across the parish and hopefully offer it at very low cost or even free.
And
so they're going to
when will
have that
that
facility.
be
Well,
opened?
we're hoping that that's going to be within 2028. That's probably ambitious, but the whole point is once we're through the budget next week, that money is earmarked, and there's an oversight body which is set up to start driving that project through.
Can I just,
Yeah.
with you mentioning the Town Youth Club, I just wanted to mention Liscay Youth Club.
Yep.
And, the fact that was ready to go, it's been put on hold. We know that St Clement is an area of particular.
It is.
I'm just trying to square the fact
course.
that as Minister and Assistant Minister for Youth Services,
Yeah.
you're prioritising the Town Youth Service over
Yeah.
the St Clement Youth
I'm
Service.
really
and
glad
I
to answer that.
Yeah,
just
you
want
can,
to
Malcolm,
understand that,
Yeah,
please.
no, really happy that you raised that point, Deputy Miles, because I visited the site yesterday with the Minister for Infrastructure, and we looked at both the youth facility and the school. The youth facility is still an amazing facility. Yes, it does need some remedial works. It's not perfect, it is starting to show its age. And similar to what we're doing in St Helier, it's a really well-developed area. So I think the youth centre looks older because everything around it is so much newer and shinier. But the regeneration is not by any means ready to go. There are no plans that have been submitted. It's not an oven-ready project. But what we do have, there was some money earmarked initially, which is still there, but we've pushed that back to 2028. But what we will do in the interim is we will spend some money on that facility to improve the overall look and flow of the building within a reasonably tight budget. It's safe, the project continues, it's incredibly well used because of the regeneration in the area. But we've got to look at what is now the main focus. St Helier has no youth facility at all. It's got a growing population there. We've got to address that now. But as soon as we know that that project is well onto its way, we can start to seriously look at bringing the Lescape project back onto the table. And I've seen the plans yesterday. They are really good plans, but we are talking about another £9 million. That money will be found in stages commencing in 2028.
Thank you.
It's competing demands.
I think you do have to, you really have to think about St Helier, and potentially it's around 1,600 children, isn't it? With no facility at the moment.
And 2028 sounds like a long time
Yeah,
away
but
at
it's
the
not-
moment,
no,
so
it'll come
we have to
quickly, but
consider the
there is,
meantime.
there's no facility. And we've got to fill that gap. It was first raised, the Town Youth Centre was first raised in 2018. Money was allocated and then that money was used for another project. So,
That must not
But-
happen again, I
yes,
suppose, in
so,
order to achieve.
and I think,
the goals.
I do understand why there's questions about the scale, but there is an existing facility there. And we're not ignoring it, we're going to try and do some remedial work around the outside of it.
There's some really quick wins. There's some quick
So
wins.
it's not forgotten about.
Thank you.
Thank you for that. So, Minister, on our last hearing, you advised that you had a personal involvement in setting up a community support group within your parish that would be helping families in hardship conditions or situations.
Yes.
Could you please describe how you see the difference between the responsibilities of central government, the parish and the third sector for supporting families in hardship?
We touched on this earlier, didn't we? A responsibility that was removed from us is quite clearly still required, and there are gaps in, there are people in real hardship who, yes, they get income support and but I had someone come to us and it was passed through to me for an electricity bill, and they'd previously been funded through another third party, and they've now stopped supporting the payment of electricity. I don't know why, but it's not just this one person. And interestingly, that led to a whole thing about food and then health. But where do you draw the lines? I just don't know where you do draw the lines, because we speak to the third part, we do speak to the third party organisations, because certainly, food banks and that type of thing, and there's even a question to help people whether in some cases food parcels might be picked up and brought to the parish hall for people to collect, rather than, because there is this stigma of going to the food banks, and that's certainly something that I don't have a problem with. You're far less likely. It's far less likely for someone to think you're picking up a food bank if you're popping into the parish hall office than if you're collecting it from the organisers themselves. But I don't know where those lines are. No. I really don't know now, because the need for all these facilities has grown.
So would you say there is still some room for coordination
Yes,
in
I
the
mean, we've set
different,
up our own group,
yes.
and that's the idea of it. You know, as I say, confidentiality is always a key thing. And so you don't tend to publicise that you're doing these things. And I think we're already seeing you know, we've got somebody there actually who's from one of the third party organisations. So already seeing instances where we will, you know, introduce people particularly for the food banks, I think.
Sorry.
Yeah, so yes, we've got a good relationship with the third parties. We've got a good relationship with CLS, you know, but they have specific rules around what payments they can make. You know, sometimes payments can't be made immediately. There's a gap between when that's where the parish will,
Yes.
you know, play a part.
I mean, one of the things that tends to come to our attention is the lack of information about what different services are doing. So, and that's going to be my next question to you. In terms of making support services more accessible, how does your department plans to raise awareness amongst families about available resources, in particular to those who might not typically seek help through the regular channels where we put our information?
I mean, our support workers would provide that information. Yeah.
So we've got, before statutory services, before children's social care, there is the Children and Families Hub, which is like the port of the place that people can go to get help, support, advice about signposting, about where to get the help they need. So a lot of agencies use that hub, and they're a font of a lot of information. They will sign families on to the right websites and the right organisations to help them, whether that's CLS or whether that's a charity or other things. They're doing that a lot. And they capture a lot of the population that have got more needs.
Yes, that's important, rather than just having that awareness being raised at one particular point, is having different departments all sharing that information.
And we got some work on top of that we've been trying to look at about in terms of when I suppose families are more into the children's social care and that space, about developing our website material around that, the work, things like the care leavers offer, to try to make those things clearer. I think is really important, and to try to signpost people the right way. We've got work to do in that space. I think we can
It's probably also worth saying, although not under this minister's portfolio, but within the department, there's obviously schools, and schools are very well versed at working with families and young people and spotting signs and knowing where to go in terms of how to resolve issues. But I think you make a very good point about clarity of information, and we can always get better at that.
I think we see the same thing through our you know, preschool. The staff there are very good at providing that information to families that they realise need that. And again, that's, you know, that's clearly something that's increasing. But you know, we have the same as the schools. It's slightly younger children, but exactly the same.
Thank you.
All right. Yeah, I just wanted to ask a couple of questions following on from that, actually. So if people want information from the Children and Families Hub, and I know I've asked this before, they need to go to Lamott Street, do they?
There's a phone number people can ring. We're not in Lamott Street now. We've moved to the new building.
Oh, right, okay, yeah.
The Children's Social Care moved in there last week, along with the Education Department. So we're all in there together, which I think will be
Where's that now?
in Cyril Lamarcus.
Oh, right, okay, so they're actually there now.
Yeah, we moved last
Monday.
No, this Monday,
Yeah.
So only just
Day
this week.
5.
Yeah, we're on the
It's
first
been a long week.
That'd be
So,
interesting.
yeah, and that will help
Not
you
at
join
your
up,
house
because you'll
anymore
have.
We've still got presence.
Still some presence.
We have, we've still got a bit
But
of a
we'll change
presence.
over
We've still got
time.
our CAM service in our in Lamott Street as well. So still work to do to get everyone where we're eventually going to be. But we'll have CLS there at Cyril and Markham, so it will be much more joined up.
Yeah.
You'll start to have a lot more of the organisation in one place, that people will have more of one place to come to, which will be helpful, I think.
That's good. And I just wondered as well with that, you know, you were saying, Minister, that you will let people collect their food from food banks at the parish hall if they are
I mean, we
feeling.
would allow them, if the food banks are happy to
Yeah. So that does happen
deliver them to
sometimes.
us. Yes,
then, yeah.
I mean, we were making that arrangement for someone this week, in fact.
Yeah. But I wondered if that happens in other parishes.
I don't know, they may not have had the, a lot of the issues depend on the makeup of your parish. There are certain parishes which seem relatively unaffected. I do, but there are some where there's not necessarily paying, they're not seeing the great requests for hardship funds and whatever, so but it could be to do with demographics.
But it seems to be a growing problem.
But
though,
it is a
doesn't
growing
Yeah.
problem. I mean, I think both Mark and I know the Constable of St Wands has got similar volumes to me of requests.
Yeah.
And we actually work quite closely. Strange enough, we work closely with the church as well, because they've got a trust which has hardship funds, and thankfully they have a different set of rules to us.
Yeah.
So between the two of us, we can normally accommodate anybody who has a request.
That's good. So I want to ask some questions now about the leadership change in SIPES.
Yep.
Minister, with recent changes in leadership at SIPES, how do you envision this impacting on your areas of responsibility?
Well, I can answer that if you.
Because, yes, Malcolm's
Yeah.
from SEB, so Malcolm has a good insight.
Obviously, when the portfolios were split, the directorate was split as well. So Education and Lifelong Learning and Directorate of Children and Families. Obviously, it's hard for me to go into too much detail about personnel, but if I can talk sort of strategically. So there will be a third directorate for improvement, which will incorporate additional services and support the functions that currently sit under the Chief Officer and the Education Directorates. And the Chief Social Worker and the Director of Children and Families hasn't changed. So we also have an acting Chief Officer of SIPES, who's in the room. So that's the way it's structured at the moment. We also spoke earlier about the new government building and the more opportunities that there are for people who have often worked in the same organisation and have never seen each other, never interacted, to work more collaboratively, to work closer together. So that's the way it's structured at the moment. Those are the people that we've got in place at the moment. And like I say, beyond that, we're getting into personnel issues, of which I wouldn't like to go too far into.
Just also wondering about the statutory responsibilities of the Chief Officer, because there's a long list, isn't there, of statutory responsibilities under the Children and Young People's Law.
Yeah.
So presumably that continues under the acting
That continues.
officer. But I'm just wondering how that's going to be managed during any further transitions about roles and so on.
So again, like any change, we will come back to it in the future to make sure that all those parts that the portfolio covers are being properly managed. If there's a need to move things around, we will conduct a full review in the future.
Okay. So I know you've already mentioned how things are at the moment, but with restructuring of the SIPES department, so further restructuring also under discussion, can you advise the panel of this restructuring, and will this address the continuity of leadership and service provision? So is there going to be Can you tell us about any more changes that are ongoing?
So at the moment, there's no further changes planned.
Right.
We don't envisage that the changes will have any impact on frontline service, which is the most important thing at the end of the day, or on staff management and staff morale, which is also additionally as important. If that situation changes, then we'd need to revisit it. But at the moment, we can't foresee any issues.
Okay. Would you be able to outline for the panel what is the timeline for appointing a new permanent chief officer for SIPES?
Okay, so again, we're getting into personnel issues. So we've got an interim in place. At the moment, I wouldn't want to comment any further on what the timeline is.
Yeah, that would come under personnel issues.
Well, because, at the end of the day, we need to make sure that the right people are in post and that there's proper appraisal process done before we need to understand, what the timeline is for making those positions permanent.
Right. Could you clarify the implications of the reported savings of £160,000 per year following the departure of the last chief officer?
Yeah, sure. So, whenever there is a change in leadership, it's a flatter management structure. So there will be savings produced. There's also a cost initially produced because when people are taking voluntary redundancy, they receive payoffs. Those payoffs, of course, are one-year costs. The savings continue into the future. So yes, we have made savings in our department, as have a number of departments, because as we've discussed before, the overall target for payroll savings is £15 million. And the way we plan to do that is to be looking at grade 11 and above and seeing where we can make those savings. Grade 11 and below aren't currently being considered, but if any individual who's at any grade wants to be considered, we will look at each on a case-by-case basis. But particularly for this department, we have got, and across the piece, it's about flatter management structures, and that's how those savings are produced.
Okay, so if this £160,000 per year savings is going to continue into the future, presumably that means that the workload is spread amongst fewer people.
That's it.
And they have more responsibilities.
Yeah, and more opportunities to delegate. So, it's how we can work better and smarter and all those things.
Right, and hopefully those people will be well supported.
Of course. So whenever we make any of these changes, we want to make sure that it's the right thing, people feel valued, and people feel that they can cope with the work that they're given and that they are the right people to be doing those roles.
Would there be any reassessment of how this is in practice?
Of course, as I said earlier, it's an ongoing evolution. When we make these savings, we've got to make sure that frontline isn't affected and that staff are properly supported. So, yeah, it's an ongoing process.
Okay. A slightly different question now. Minister, the panel notes that a Council of Ministers amendment to the budget includes an exchange of expenditure from children and families to education and lifelong learning. So please can you outline the rationale for this change?
It is a book entry, to be honest. There was, work done initially on the split between education and children. Further work has established that, in fact, it was necessary to move a sum of money between children and families and education and lifelong learning, so that in effect the budgets and the amount of money available were actually aligned. There are no changes to what each the responsibilities of each department. It is very much just a book adjustment to correct that situation.
Okay. So this won't mean that something that would have been done by children and families is not going to be done?
No, it was a miscalculation in the first instance when the split was done, and it doesn't mean that there's that work will move from one department or another. It also doesn't mean that something that was due to be done won't be done. It is just to ensure the money is actually with the correct department.
Right, thank you. I think that's you, Helen.
Yeah. I think my question's probably going to be answered by Deputy Labby as well, because it's about 0 hours contracts.
There you go.
The panel wrote after the last hearing about the role of 0 hours contracts
Yep.
across sites.
Yep.
And it was noted that there's no central system for recording or reporting the hours worked for 0 hours contracts or bank workers across sites. And I think we were just looking for an explanation about why there isn't a system to manage that.
Yeah, okay. So if I can just talk over the top of that first. So, you know, we're mindful that legislation changed recently whereby anyone who's on a 0 hours contract can ask for a change in their terms and conditions if they're not working 0 hours work. 0 hours contracts are incredibly important to our part of the service, not least because lots of people who work in our service are working second jobs. In fact, very few who are on 0 hours contract are actually is their sole post. But even amongst those people, it can very often suit their circumstances because they want to work those, ephemeral hours, or they want to work in evenings or whatever. But what I've got for you is some numbers, and the numbers are split for people who are on a 0 hours contract and have worked in the last 12 months, because those are the most accurate figures. So under children's social care, unique 0 hours contracts, there are 27 people. In youth services, there are 89 people, just unique.
Which is understandable.
Yeah, of course. Yeah, exactly. But people who have a permanent role as well as a 0 hours contract, in children's services there are, children's social services there are 31. And again, in young people service, again, 75. Yeah. And that's because of the nature of the work. So, we do have that data, we will always have a grip on who's on a 0 hours contract and whether it remains appropriate for the role that they're doing.
Thank you. Is there any plan at all to review the use of 0 hours contracts across your departments?
I think it's an ongoing process. It's something that we continually look at to make sure that they are appropriate. I think particularly in our department and perhaps in health, that we run on that backup of 0 hour contracts.
I think the director told us last time that there was some plan to reduce the 0 hours contracts in children's social care. And we're just wondering how many you were going to reduce that by.
Can I answer that?
So it's not necessarily about reducing them per se. What we're trying to do is understand the ones that are still being used. So what we know is, from the work we've done, we've got a lot of people that have got a 0 hours contract that haven't worked with us for a year. Okay. So what we're saying is we don't want to keep those open if people aren't actually active. Yeah. So the work we're doing is to review that, and we know that quite a high proportion of them are in that space, and a high proportion of what's in children's social care is really in residential space, because that's the same thing about out of hours working.
So if somebody has got a 0 hours contract, will they kind of drop off your list, as it were, after a set period of time if they've not worked for you?
That's right.
So that's the work we're doing to review them at the moment, is to say, actually, they haven't been used for a really long time, they're not being active, so we'll look to end those contracts if they're not being in place for a long time.
And then you'd renew them if you needed to bring
and if
that
they
in
want,
again.
or if they want to stay and they carry on working, that would be different. But this is about trying to say we don't want contracts running that aren't being used.
Yeah, okay, thank you.
Okay.
And it's
just,
quite high, actually. It's quite,
just
really quite
before we leave that area, on the States Employment Board, we get a monthly dashboard across the whole of the states. And we have a dashboard particularly for 0 hours contracts so that we can manage them and again make sure that they're appropriate.
You can drill down into departments. Okay, thank you. I'm going to hand you over to the Conotard now.
I was expecting to answer that. I don't know.
Oh, no.
Deputy
when you call me Deputy Labby, that's all he said.
I'm so sorry.
That's all right. I knew who you meant.
Conotard Labby, I was going to hand you over to Conotard Labby.
We're waiting for you.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Ready, sir.
Got you. Okay, over to me. Minister, Please can you provide the panel an update on the progress of the Children Civil Status Law, please?
Right, this is the consequential amendments. Yep. Strangely enough, I answered a question in the States on this in the last session. Yeah.
Yeah, well, we noted some of the changes, I think, didn't we?
Yeah, you're on a different version.
Okay, sorry.
Yeah.
Just a general
So
update. as well.
yeah, so the work on this is well advanced. As I covered actually in my question the other day, there's 11 additional pieces of legislation have been found that require amendments, and that is the one thing that might impact our ability to lodge something this by the end of this year. I think we're still hoping to do that. There's a slight, and I think Ben might be able to explain this better than I can, but there is a slight problem with some of the social security regulations. That's correct, isn't it?
Well,
Ben?
I wouldn't say it's a problem.
Slight, not a problem, but
There is lodged, as you'll all be aware, the social security regulations that deal with death grants and parental allowance and the extension of that. So the terminology in those regulations, we cannot amend by consequential regulations because it is not on the statute book yet. All that's caused is the drafters to prepare a sort of two sets of amendments, one if the regulations don't pass through the Assembly on December the 10th, and one if they do. We have those already prepared, so we just pick option A, option B, dependent upon the outcome of that debate. But we still envisage lodging those consequential amendments before the end of the year.
We were hoping, Minister, perhaps we might be able to have sight of those 11 extra amendments, if that would be possible. Not here, obviously, but could we have sight of
We will
those?
send you a draft of the consequential
Thank you very much.
regulations. That's no problem. I think the 11 that they were identified quite a while ago, so they've been well worked into the consequential regulations.
Okay. Can you clarify how many of the 44 will be lodged for consideration by the Assembly, and how many could be dealt with through ministerial orders?
The way the primary law is set up is none of the. I think maybe there's one in there that amends an order that you could do by a ministerial order if you wanted, and that's around changing, amending another order. But
there's only one that falls into that category.
I'm off the top of my head, yes, and I think it's around the adoption particulars. Part of what we're trying to do, as the panel knows, is change the particulars around adoption and birth so that the certificates resemble each other as much as possible to remove any stigma around a child having an adoption certificate as opposed to a birth certificate, and then the parental order certificate that we plan to introduce as a result of the Children's Civil Status Law. Again, the particulars, which is the fields that must be recorded on that certificate, all accord with adoption and birth as much as possible, so that to the untrained eye they will look very, very similar.
And the other issue that we have spoken about as a team, and indeed we've discussed with Ben on quite a few occasions, is that awful word illegitimacy. What steps are being taken to address issues related to this word in Jersey's law?
So there's two things, and there's sort of two steps here. So the first is LOD have given further consideration as to how to provide absolute legal certainty around the amendments relating to legitimacy driven by the Children's Civil Status Law. And so following that consideration, it's been advised that we develop a small primary amendment law to deal with amendments in relation to legitimacy. So we're going to do that. That involves dragging some of what was going to be in the consequential regulations out of them and putting them in a primary amendment law to be lodged very early next year. With primary law, you have the additional step of Ministry of Justice approval, Privy Council. So there's a live conversation currently with law officers and Ministry of Justice, and the result of those conversations is that is not going to impact on the bigger milestone of bringing an appointed day act in mid-2025, which was our timescale anyway. So that's the first step in terms of legitimacy. The second step, which is in the Chief Minister's remit, because that's the Minister who has responsibility for the legitimacy laws, but I've spoken to the officer this morning, is a widespread review of the concept of legitimacy in Jersey law. The commitment was that review would be undertaken before the end of this term. That review is well advanced. So that review will be completed before the end of this term, and that will outline, okay, what steps have to be taken, or what has to be considered to actually just remove the entire concept from Jersey law. So that work is, I'm happy to say, underway and well advanced as well.
Good, thank you. I mean, I'm sure I'll speak on behalf of the panel to say that it's, if ever there was a stigma surrounding any word, it's that word. And we're very grateful for you for the work that you're doing.
Yeah, and I think the positive in that is we're finding actually, and the status is outdated. I'll make no bones about that. But the effect of it, we are not finding much. Most of it has had the teeth knocked out of it over the years. The amendments to the Wills and Successions Law about a decade ago that put illegitimate and legitimate children on equal footing was I think the last big one. So the review is finding that actually there's not much left that we have to think about before we take forward the work and the decision to actually just remove the concept.
Excellent, thank you. And finally from me, it's all about the timeline, Minister. You advised the Assembly that the timeframe for lodging the consequential amendments would be the end of this year or early 25. Are you able to provide a more specific update on that timeframe today?
Well, I think we're absolutely still aiming for the end of this year, but the 11 additional pieces of legislation obviously raise a question as whether, potentially there could be a delay, but the intention is still to do it by the end of this year. I can't be clear on that because you simply don't know whether that could happen at the moment. We don't think it will, but it might, it could.
Thank you, Minister.
Okay. Thank you. I'm going to be asking a few set of questions around CAMS.
Okay.
Okay. So in the public hearing for the budget review, which took place on the 16th of October, it was noted that the current mental health and well-being strategy for CAMS has come to an end. Can you please advise the panel what key outcomes or successes from this strategy would you like to carry forward into the next stage?
Well, if I can, I will ask Darren to come forward.
To the table.
Just come to the table.
And Darren, if you could please just state your name
Yes.
and role when you come up.
Yes, Darren Bowring, Associate Director for Mental Health and Wellbeing in CAMS. The Children and Young People's Emotional Wellbeing and Mental Health Strategy is continuing until 2025, so it hasn't concluded. What we have concluded efficiently and early is implementing everything that was included in that strategy. It was a significant piece of work that went wider than CAMS and involved lots of changes around education as well. The most successful thing that we've done from that is increased the staffing in CAMS from 17 at the time the strategy was introduced to 74 currently. We've redesigned the CAMS service from a single service into a number of individual services, such as a CAMS duty and assessment service, which was a brand new service in the strategy, which has enabled children to be assessed once they are referred really quickly. A really pleasing piece of data was in October this year, CAMS completed initial assessments on the most general referrals within 21 days, completed the whole assessments. So that's really quick. So we have an early intervention service, we have that duty service, specialist CAMS, and we have a neurodevelopmental service that was introduced as part of a strategy. So we have wholly staffed services now responding to some of the capacity challenges that we've had, given a significant rise in referrals for neurodevelopmental assessments and mental health work. So the vast majority of the strategy is in place. What we aim to do early next year with our commissioning colleagues is to formally review the implementation. So they will be reviewing the implementation and the impact, which will then support us as we begin to consider the strategy that is required from 2026 onwards, which will follow this.
Okay, thank you so much for such a, a good insight. I was trying to follow up with my questions to see what you have or not responded. So I think you kind of have responded to some of them. So I'm going to jump a little bit here, and I'm going to ask you if you can advise the panel of what specific improvements are being considered to actually make sure that this transition is seamless.
The transition.
So the transition, I should have started the question a bit earlier. The transition, from the young people from CAMS into the adult mental health services. I forgot to.
Okay,
Yeah.
okay. So we have a very good and working well process that all children aged 17 and a half are put forward for transition. So that process starts then. We have a monthly meeting between CAMS and our adult mental health colleagues, which involves psychiatrists and psychologists, to discuss all of those young people in transition, and we agree transition plans with them. CAMS are currently recruiting a healthcare assistant who will have a specific focus on care navigation and transition, so they will be an additional layer to support young people between the two services. Adult mental health also have a number of posts to support that, and are also recruiting for a number of key clinical posts, which will help, because I think the volume of referrals to CAMS is also now putting pressure on the volume of transitions we are making to adult services.
Can I just ask a quick question? The age of 17 and a half, obviously they would normally transition into adults at 18. Is 17 and a half a bit late?
Well, the clinical team will be working with young people, so there will be a number of young people with plans to conclude the work from CAMS. It won't be everybody who gets to 17 and a half that will be transitioning. There's also a number of young people that we will try to be flexible with in terms of that pathway. So I think currently we have 88 young people over the age of 18 still open to our CAMS service. A number of those are open because the input they're receiving, be that therapy, is progressing well, they're receiving good support, and we think it's in their interest to continue the work that they're doing with their familiar staff. So I would hope we see a flexible approach.
Even though the policy is 17 and a half.
There is no hard cut-off
okay,
at 18, and I think our figures indicate that we've
absolutely.
never done that. No, that's good.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. Okay, so can you please advise us if you see any specific role for CAMS that would play in supporting individuals with complex needs and who may require extended support after the age of 18?
Yeah, so maybe not just to adult mental health services, but more support in other areas too.
Could CAMS be part of that service?
Do you look at the person holistically and see what they might need?
Sort of transition into adult social care or...
Yeah.
Are you happy for me to pick that
Yeah,
up? 'Cause
yeah.
I think that's probably the different things. So if it's a child and it's a mental health issue or a well-being issue, then it would sit in CAMS. I guess if that child had more comprehensive needs, which were across, disability and other more complex issues, that would be likely that child often was having a social care package and maybe a CAMS package. We should be looking at the care plan for the child, for the young person, and that should then direct, do we need adult social care? Do we need adult mental health? What's the later care plan going to be and the ongoing support needed?
And presumably that would start earlier than 17 and a
Yeah,
half.
so if you're a child with complex needs, it would be much earlier.
Okay, thank you.
Because you'd be thinking about, is there a care or complex need in the future? Yeah.
Okay, now we've just gone past our time, but there is one more question. I don't know if
Okay.
you've got time here. So this one is just about online safety, and it's just a short question. Minister, could you update the panel on the multi-agency online safety campaign supported by the NSPCC Jersey and the Jersey Safeguarding Partnership Board, including the role of SIPES in the campaign?
So the minister and I
We
went
attended,
to
yes.
that conference.
We did go to it was an excellent, yep, you're quite right. We attended the conference that they held. It was absolutely excellent. We fully support it's called the Real Life campaign launched at the conference. It's a multi-agency campaign, which is support from, as you've said, NSPCC, and the Safeguarding Partnership in Jersey, and it aims to bring together all those children, those working with children aged 9 to 11 in the island. So that would include, that obviously includes ourselves and people working within SIPES. I don't know if there's any other, we're keeping children safe in schools, but that's very much, although we've got an awareness of that, that is in the realm of the education minister. So I don't know if there's anything else that you've got, Donna, or?
I think the overriding objective from the conference was that, online safety, we can't just leave it to children and blame them when it goes wrong. We've got to take, I know, but that's what happens in the real world. And we heard some really powerful stories about people whose lives have got wrapped up in some. So we've got to take responsibility, but we've also got to give people the tools to make sure that their young people are safe when they're online. The minister and I met after that conference with one of the people who's heading up that project, and we are going to be taking that work forward together.
I mean, it's interesting, we heard yesterday, and it's a view that this was at the World Children's Day conference, from the representative from the UN, that they do not support the idea of the Australian legislation that they're proposing.
This is the mobile phone ban.
Yes, which attempts to ban children from social media and block them. That is probably unworkable, and of course it removes any of the the benefits perhaps from social media, because there are benefits as well as downsides. The other thing, of course, it's likely to do is just drive them to use underground platforms that are developed, and that's even worse because we'd have no control over those.
So better to teach young people to use those applications safely.
So you mentioned about taking the work forward with somebody from the organisation. So that will be some work done within SIPES around this area.
Shall I?
Yeah, go ahead.
That's the Safeguarding Children Partnership, so it's a
within
broader
that
thing, it's
board.
across all of the agencies working together, that some of the ongoing learning development, the training programme will run in that partnership way, so it's available to all organisations rather than one.
Okay, so that will be
much
within the
bigger thing.
Safeguarding Partnership Board area. And just the last little bit, are there any plans for further campaigns on other online safety topics or not?
So that would, part of that work, they'll continue to drive forward that knowledge and understanding across the partnership.
Okay.
So that agencies are aware, so that would include a continuing
So there may be more
development
coming
rather
up.
than necessarily a big campaign.
It's a change in culture. We've got to embed that everywhere.
And that's where we'll probably see it within the Safeguarding Partnership
Yeah,
Board.
it's definitely the right space for it to sit in, because it'll hit a much larger group of organisations across government and outside, which is what you want really.
Yeah.
And schools, because every partnership's at that board, part of that partnership.
Well, I think that's it. I think we are done.
We've got to.
Yeah, okay.
Right, thank you very much.
Thank you very much, everybody.
Let us know when we stopped.
We can bring the hearing to an end then.